Hi everyone, welcome to the 7th episode of Barking from Rooftops. My name is Jim Gillis. Today's guest is Sarah Owings. Sarah is an early childhood educator turned animal trainer. She is a Pryor Academy certified training partner and has been working as a teacher of people and animals for over 20 years. She specialises in learner-centric applications of behaviour principles and is passionate about transforming the lives of challenging learners, as well as the lives of people that care for them. As an international speaker and regular contributor to online training forums, she is known for innovative approaches to tough behaviour problems and her compassionate and insightful teaching. Sarah has been a popular guest in a variety of podcasts. She's written articles on topics such as stimulus control, release cues, and toy-related cues. Her current interests include reframing concepts like impulse control, operationalizing concepts like trust, the science of cues, and encouraging trainers to embrace a philosophy of brave learning. So today, join me in welcoming Sarah to the podcast, where we'll be discussing errorless learning versus trial and error learning. Hi there, Sarah.
Hi there, Jim.
Hi there. Thanks so much for joining us today. And can you hear me nice and clearly? I know we've had a little bit of technical issues so far, but we seem to be all good now. Fingers crossed.
I think we're good.
Good
We're
stuff.
good. How am I?
Yeah, you sound nice and clear. You're perfect there, Sarah. Great stuff. So thanks so much for doing this, and welcome to the podcast, Sarah. I've been really looking forward to this. I wonder if we could start with just a little bit of background on yourself, how you got into dog training, your journey to where we got to just now, and your wonderful dog Tucker, who I'm so keen to hear about too.
As you kind of mentioned, I started out my journey. Well, I think everyone's journey, every piece of their learning fits into who they are at where they are now. But we'll start with the early childhood education. I spent a number of years teaching 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. So if you, I think that's the best foundation for any learning about impulse control possible is with young children, right? So I started there and had a real bent on progressive education and we called it child-centric or progressive education, which I think is the foundation for a lot of what I do. And then I got interested in dog training the way most dog trainers do. I had a difficult dog, not Tucker, it was my other dog, Zoe. And started reading books about, trying to help her and going down that path. And the more I learned, the more fascinated I was. And that brought this whole new interesting collision between my progressive education principles and applied behavior analysis, which I was learning from one of my first mentors was Dr. Rosales Ruiz. He was very kind and generous at that time with lots of his time and instruction and mentoring. And it was kind of a collision because those two worlds don't often speak well together. But for me, I felt like I was able to bridge the divide. And that passion just built over time, that I felt like you could have a fully animal-centric or child-centric or learner-centric, very respectful of that individual being, and have a really strong foundation in learning principles, which to me is sort of like the law of gravity. It's just always there. It's clean, it's simple, and it makes everything make sense. And then Dr. Friedman came along and inspired many of us to sort of do that. She has that whole thing of study of one, sure. And that deep, and she has a background in education as well, or special education. So what her message really spoke to me as well. And but I had been studying this for a long time, and then it just all came together. And I switched careers finally to professional training. Got involved with Pryor Academy, which was very lucky for me because that was a wonderful experience. And then lots of years seeing clients, which I think everyone should do because it's a rich, fertile ground for lots of learning and growth, and it's not always easy. And then I was called into a shelter. I started doing some shelter consulting, and I was called into a shelter to evaluate this dog Tucker. And at the time, he had all those labels, impulsive, defiant. And, I read what his owners wrote up about him, and that's all they had been told about him. And they were also told, right, that their job was to suppress that as pet owners. And that's the instructions they were given. And so it turned into quite a battle because Tucker is his genetic makeup is such that he powers through any amount of discomfort, he's quite a strong dog. So 4 years later of all that suppression and all those labels and all that misunderstanding, he was in a shelter and considered unadoptable. And his primary behaviors were intense scream barking, like the kind that make your ears bleed, shoving all his weight through doorways very, very quickly. So he was quite a flight risk, and then he would not come back. Chasing other animals, aggressive toward other animals, and just generally doing all the things that we put into that bucket, impulsive. And so I was brought in to evaluate him, and at the time the shelter staff were afraid to take him from his kennel to the potty area. And he had barked so much that he had lost his voice. I mean, he was like hoarse. Had been screaming so much. Anyway, and that's when I kind of had this moment of, I sort of came full head. All the things I'd read, like ignore the behavior you don't want, reinforce what you do. And Tucker said, okay, you could ignore this barking for 5 hours if you want to, but I'm not, And I asked the shelter staff, and we have a video we can show. I asked the shelter staff, they said, well, we just wait for him to stop barking before we throw the ball. And I said, okay, so how is that working for you? Like, that's always a really good question, is, are you seeing a change? If you apply a teaching idea, a principle, and that one is extinction. So I'm going to just stand there and wait until I'm going to withhold reinforcement until the animal stops doing what I don't like. And then I'm going to give them the thing, which is so what all dog trainers are taught to do. We're all taught to do this. And it had been 2 weeks of them doing this with no change in the behavior whatsoever. In fact, he was starting to scream bark earlier and earlier as soon as he knew someone was coming to take him to the play yard, he would start. Anyway, so that's something really important to ask is, if you apply a procedure like extinction, watch the behavior. Is it reducing? Is it effective? And if the answer is no, then you have to take another stab at it. And that's where I started really thinking. That's basically one of the most important thoughts I've always had, or any trainer should have, is there a better way than this? Like, can I get to what I need from this dog in a better way? Because we're going to be at a stalemate forever. And that's where I started really digging into, what is this impulse control thing? Is it a useful label? Is it a useful construct? And it just sort of opened up kind of wonderful, wonderful avenues of learning for me and for Tucker. And so, so that's where I am today.
Yeah, and very similar to myself, actually. I have a Labrador called Floyd, who was 2 years institutionalized in the kennels prior to me taking him on, and he was probably one of the best teachers I ever had. I don't know if you felt that with your original dog, Sarah. It's such a good experience, and it's something I would recommend to anyone to a certain extent. But I'm so pleased that Tucker has found a good home with yourself, Sarah. And how is he doing now, out of interest, if you don't mind bringing us up to speed after, how long have you had him for now?
6 years.
6 years. Wow.
6 years. Well, I think he's pretty great. Right now, he's practicing his impulse control right now. There he is.
Love it.
As I mentioned, this is the context room where we don't do any training and we don't do any toys. And so he is able to relax in here. This is his place to relax. He's a fantastic dog. When I met him, first thought I thought was, there has to be a better way. My second thought was, this dog is like striking gold. Like somebody threw away $1 million bracelet and they didn't know what they had. I mean, all the traits that made him difficult make him an incredible dog. I mean, he's an incredible working dog. He's an elite nose work dog. He's a trainer's dream dog because he just keeps working. I mean, he'll just work and work and work. I don't know. I love him. He has asked us to sort of change our life. We have, he's definitely required a lot of time and effort and energy. He's not a dog that you can just adopt and forget about. He's definitely a full-time dog, but when you give him what he needs, which he currently has 15 acres, he gets plenty of exercise and jobs to do, and attention. He's wonderful. And so, and he's also, more importantly, learned the skills that I need him to, right? So more than, I mean, the huge part was providing what he needed in life, and removing that. He reminded me of a lot of the kids I work with. When kids were routinely disciplined in a harsh way or spanked, those kids would come to school with kind of that, you can't make me. They've already had this sort of, you can't make me feeling about the interactions with the adults in their lives. And Tucker had that a little bit. Was the second there was any, like, you know, no or correction, or it was an immediate, like, yeah, you can't make me. Like, he really was intense about it. And so I don't really operate that way anyway, but I just took it all away. Like, I took it all away and said, you know, I gave him as much freedom as I could and just said, whatever you're willing to give me, I'm willing to take. And slowly he just changed. He relaxed. He didn't fight so much. And he learned the things I need him to do, which honestly, for him, the most important skill I could have possibly ever taught him was the skill of just standing still and waiting quietly. I can't tell you how often we go back to that. And I made it incredibly fluent. And even in contexts, like the toughest context for him would be a context where he's been swimming and he's wet and he's got toys. That's the context where I'm most likely to see that full regression of the old Tucker. I can just ask him to wait and he can go, oh yeah, right. I mean, and it's the simplest behavior, but that's what I want to talk about today. These behaviors that we call, a dog controlling their impulses. Like, what is that? What does that look like? And it's usually standing and waiting or turning away from something. And those are simple behaviors. Just the trick is getting them so fluent that the animal's able to kind of bring them up in contexts that are cueing the old behaviors. And that's the challenge. So I don't know if we want to show anything about this. We could show a video. If we show number 3, fetch habits. This is just a little before and after of Tucker, and the aha I want people to have. Just watch. Tucker, wait. Tucker, wait. Wait. Okay, good. So that was an example of extinction. That one. Right? So
sure is.
So in that clip, the shelter worker is standing there in front of him holding a ball, waiting for him to be quiet, right? And yes, that was a dog barking. Did you hear it? Yeah, it's okay. And so that's the behavior that he would just do continuously over and over and over again. And what the big aha I had was, because I'm really interested in cues, is, oh, that behavior is on cue. That's not, if you were to take out like what's going on inside him, is he having an impulse issue, right? Right, all that stuff. Take all that out and just think, oh, that behavior is on cue, and the cue is someone standing there with a ball. So if I stand in front of him with a ball and I expect him to give me a different behavior, that is unfair. It's actually saying, here are the rules, but give me something else. And I actually call that a cue pileup, where you're expecting one, right? She kept saying, Tucker, wait, Tucker, wait, Tucker, wait. But that cue doesn't mean anything to him under those conditions. And as soon as I started to unpack that, I started to think, okay, I need to change the cue. I need to change the conditions first, because he can't give me what I want in that context. So what I did was I started with him, and I just took him to a quiet room every day. I didn't have toys. I used food, and I taught him the behavior you're going to see in the next clip, which if you continue playing this video, this is where we went from food, and then I went to, you're going to see in this clip, toys that were not tennis balls. That was a little easier. Also, me sitting down was easier. So me standing up with the ball was the hardest. And me sitting down with food was the easiest. And I worked up slowly. Can he offer me? And all the behavior I wanted was a quiet wait. That's it. So show the next one. You'll see the continuation of that video. You see where that ended up.
Sure. Which one would that be? Video still the same one, or just towards the end?
It's the same one. Just play the second half of it.
No problem at all.
So you can jump ahead to, there you go. So you can see that's not even the final piece. That's just a little step along the way. So basically, the way to really think about behavior is if you are just thinking about reinforcing quiet, you're going to miss the whole context that's cueing it. You need to be aware of the whole context first. So just standing there in a context that's cueing barking, waiting for quiet, is setting the dog up for a very intense trial and error experience, right? They have to start going through all the things that they know to try and get you to give them the ball or whatever it is they want. And many dogs like Tucker have I call it a very narrow repertoire. So he was doing two things there: backing up and barking, backing up and barking. That's it. If you wait forever, he's not going to offer you anything else. He's not going to, he doesn't have a wide repertoire of things that are going to scroll to the surface there. The only time he got quiet was he had to take a breath, right? That's why he took a breath, because he ran out of breath, and then she threw the ball, reinforcing the whole duration of barking. So when you just look at it as, oh, there's a cue here, there's a behavior, there's a consequence, let's change the antecedents. That's the cue part. And I always ask my clients, in what context can this dog stand and wait? Because no dog is barking 24/7, right? No dog is freaking out all the time. There has to be a context where it's easier to stand and wait. And for Tucker, it was being indoors with me sitting down with food. That would work for him. Now, some dogs are really that intense about food. So you standing in front of them with a treat pouch on might be really too hard. Like, just way too much stuff happening. So some dogs I have started with a bowl of food in the other room on a table, and I'm just sitting in the room quietly, and I get the behavior I want. I'll mark it, and we walk to the other room, feed over there, and come back. So that you're just, however you can change that cue so that the animal can have new options. That's the key, because you have to get the repertoire going that you want. And that is what my definition of errorless learning is finding the right starting point. And what that really means is thinking about context. In what context can this happen? I don't know if we want to just show that slide number 5, just because we want to talk about trial and error. This is from Skinner himself.
Sure. What we'll do is we'll cover off that just for the people who will be watching this on Spotify later. That was video 3 that we watched with Sarah and her dog Tucker. And that's one where he's barking in the kennel at the kennel staff. Is that right? And maybe just before we go into image 5, we just spend some time just unpacking the kind of learning processes behind that. At what point, I guess, was that behaviour reinforced? I take it the kennel staff weren't deliberately reinforcing that barking behaviour. At some point, they would have had to have thrown the ball. Were they waiting for a gap in that behaviour and then throwing the ball to try and reward, I guess, him being quiet of some nature? Is that right? Is that what they were trying to achieve, Sarah?
Right. Well, that's what they were trained to do. And it was a kennel that, I love this place, by the way. They were really working hard to be a positive reinforcement based kennel. So, and all the staff were trained, ignore behavior you don't want. And as soon as he does it right, throw the ball. And I really applaud them for that, because the alternative, it could be really harsh. In fact, that's his previous owners. The alternatives were very, very harsh, threatening him with a BB gun, just to try and get that barking to stop, which again, you say, how well did that work? Is if you're going to bring in the big guns, then it should work very fast and be done. But if 4 years later, he's still behaving this way, you have to say there's got to be a better way. So that's what the staff was doing. So the first clip was a kennel staff person holding a camera phone and the ball. That was the only real before we had. He didn't look that bad to me in that video. I was like, well, but they were actually afraid of him, because he would charge at them and try and get the ball. And the thing to be aware of was that entire context of taking him to that yard, which he associated with balls, the whole context and the person standing there with a ball, all of that was cueing the barking. And it was beautifully on cue. Just think of it. It was beautifully trained. If you wanted a barking behavior, which, let's say like search and rescue or something like that, where you need a sustained barking behavior, that's perfect. And I find it really helpful to think this way, because now I'm not blaming him anymore. I'm just seeing potential. I'm like, okay, this dog is really determined. So yeah, you should see him do a 5-minute nose work search where it takes him a really long time to find something. Does he ever quit? No. So, and I did that with kids when I was working with kids too. I was like, okay, all these things that the parents are saying are problems, these are actually strengths, but you have to just, and that's why I know I'm you wanted me to summarize this, and I'm digressing. That's why I feel so sad when people think that behaviorism is reductionist. Yeah. That it somehow is reducing the individual to a black box where they're just responding to stimuli, and you're not respecting their emotions or their soul or whatever. And to me, it's the opposite. As soon as I saw this beautiful thing happening, I thought of Tucker as this incredible dog that had incredible potential, and look how well he could learn this behavior. So why couldn't he learn anything else, right? And he wasn't broken, and he didn't have an impulse mechanism that was misfiring, right? Yeah. Something broken in his head. Yeah. He's just a spectacular dog. So anyway, so clip 1, that was all about me figuring that out. I didn't have that figured out at the time, by the way. I kind of came in with that old mindset as well of waiting him out, I had a number of really tough sessions with him. I was like, well, this is not working. So the next clip that you saw was quite a bit later, where I had basically retaught him the thing I wanted. So I took him out of the context of a play yard. I started in a quiet room, and I just essentially captured standing still, quietly waiting. And I reinforced it over and over and over and over and over again. And then I taught him that if he offered that, which pretty soon he was like, great, this is working great, I'm going to do it all the time. Then I started teaching him that when he did that, I would give him a release cue and chuck the food. Right. So, but I had to stay sitting down. If I stood up, things started to get a little too exciting. So, but again, think of it as a cue. Me sitting down with food he was able to offer the correct thing. But once that got stronger, I was able to slowly, I call it fading in. I fade in the harder things. So in that clip, the second clip you saw, we were outside. That's a hard thing. But I am still sitting down. That makes it easier. And I'm using these rubber toys instead of his tennis balls. And I'm also using 2 of them. You don't see it, but that also makes it easier. So I'm never taking away his toy. I'm always throwing the one I have. And that's me fading in the harder stimuli. And eventually he is now able, I can stand up, I can hold a tennis ball, and he can offer that waiting behavior. So those are the 2 clips you saw.
Sure. And that's a great example of errorless training, because then he can't make mistakes, right? There are no errors, because all you're asking for is just a stationary behavior. And that's something that's a lovely example of something that is errorless. There's no extinction, whether that's inadvertent or otherwise, and there's no frustration as a consequence of that in his learning process. Do you find that makes it more fluid to work with, easier to work with, when there's not lacking that frustration?
Well, it certainly feels better. It certainly feels better. And I think it was definitely more effective, because even though it had a feeling of I call it like a breadcrumb trail, I had to change the context. It's very hard to change your own mindset. So just that shift felt like effort. Like it felt like I was like, oh, I got to rethink this whole thing. So for someone new to this, it might feel like more work initially. But once you start seeing things this way, it gets easier and easier, because you just immediately start with, in what context can this happen? And anytime things start going, I call it whoosy whatsy, anytime things start going the wrong way, for example, I might be in the quiet room with Tucker, I've chucked the food a little bit too fast a few times, and I've tried to stand up. And you'll see, I could see his respiration starting to increase. Instead of going, oh, that's an error, I have to punish him, or I don't know, walk away from him, or take the food away, or do something. My first thought was, I need to change the cue. Something is cueing this. I got to change the cue. So I'd either sit down, or I would take him outside for a little while, or, and that it frees you up. You get out of that gridlock of sort of a head-to-head with the dog of, you're staring at me and I'm staring at you, and I see the bad behavior starting and I can't reinforce it, and now we're stuck. Yeah. And right. But if you just go, oh, that behavior is getting cued right now, how can I change the cue? How can I I call it changing the channel. Just take a breath. And that is so relaxing and freeing. And you go outside, you take a breath, and you go, okay, let's rethink this. Let's find another starting point. Let's come back. Because there's always a starting point. There's always a place of success, in my opinion. So anyway, that's kind of, that's why I sort of wanted to play just that slide, which is, where I lost it now. Oh, number 5. It's just to frame it with Skinner a little bit, that this idea fits in with, and it's just a slide, and it's just saying that errors are not necessary for learning. There we go. Errors are not necessary for learning to occur. Errors are not a function of learning or vice versa, nor are they blamed on the learner. Errors are a function of poor analysis of behavior, a poorly designed shaping program, moving too fast from step to step in the program, and this is the most important one for me, the lack of the prerequisite behavior necessary for success in the program. That last piece for me is the key piece, and I keep that in mind always, is what behavior is lacking here? What does this animal not have that I need in order to get what I want? So anyway, that's a slide. Quick question, Jim. Can you hear my voice when the slides are up?
Yep, all good.
Oh, okay, good. Because I
Yep,
didn't know
you're
if I
fine.
was muted at that time.
You're all good.
So,
And I have one quick point on that
Yeah.
that last slide for you, and I'll
Yep.
have all the ethologists that I know, I can hear them already screaming into the microphone, but trial and error is part of nature. It's part of a natural learning process. Kim Brophy will be on me if I don't ask this particular question. I guess I have my take on this, but I would love to hear yours, Sarah, just in terms of that particular point.
Yes. All learning is natural. So, yes.
Sure.
You can.
And my take on it was that user applied is probably the best way to view that. Yes, it happens in nature, and trial and error is a valuable learning process.
Mhm.
Punishment occurs in nature.
Yep.
There are verses out there, quite rightly so. I think the term or the best way of putting it would be user applied. Right? There's enough of it out there. We don't need to be bringing more to the equation. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I like that. Absolutely. It's going to happen anyway. And I am not saying, like, if my dog's trying to get my sandwich off the table right now, I'm not going to be scary about it, but I'm going to block them or, gently take their collar and say no. That's going to happen in life. I'm not saying we're just going to let the dogs run around and, do all the stuff. What I'm talking specifically about, and I believe Skinner was as well, is deliberate teaching strategies. When you're deliberately coming in to teach something to a learner, any learner, what is the most effective way to do it? And certainly I have seen trial and error learning be very fast with almost no fallout, right? But then there are other animals like Tucker or my other dog, Zoe, for whom trial and error learning creates so many problems. And if we just assume that that's the norm, that that's the only way, that that's the only natural way, then we're going to get stuck there. We're not going to have that creative workaround in mind that we could do it differently. I'm certainly not saying never, ever, ever teach, leave it with negative punishment ever, or nothing like that. It's not that harsh. It's not that black and white. It's just there are alternatives. And the alternatives for me are, have you found the right starting point?
Yeah.
And does that learner have the prerequisite skills?
Yeah, so important.
Right? And if you have those two pieces, then, and actually something I like to do as a teacher is, if I feel like I've really built really good prerequisite skills, I've really done the work, I do like to bring the learner into a place sometimes of exploration, problem solving, creativity, right? But I don't want to start there. Yeah. Right? I want lots of confident skill building. The animal knows how to do lots of things in a lot of contexts. The reinforcement patterns are clear. Everything is going. And then you might go, okay, now you got these skills. Here's a puzzle for you. And the puzzle might elicit a little frustration or a little, but the animal, hopefully, or the learner will be like, yeah, but I got these skills. So I'm going to try this and I'll try this. Oh, that worked. Oh, that didn't work. And so don't get me wrong. I like those thinking moments quite a lot, but I think it's fair to bring them in after the teacher has done her homework. Sure. Properly. For some skills. So actually, why don't we play another slide? Mm-hmm. And that would be, let me see. Well, let's see. Wait. Hold on. Why don't we do slide 9? Sure. So we can talk a little bit about the leave it exercise. in relation to what all this works. So leave it is something that I certainly, like my very first dog class I ever took, ever. It was 20 years ago, was leave it. That was first thing. Day one, puppy class, leave it. And the idea was that we got to teach these dogs impulse control from day one, right? Because we're using reinforcement. And then even today, I bought this bag of treats. This is on the back of it. This was just last year. I bought this bag of treats and it says that, you know, the pet owner who buys this bag is going to go through a leave it process. And if you look at it, it says start with your handful of treats. It's good that it says in a quiet area. So that's one antecedent arrangement. Hold the treat out in your hand and then wait and tell the dog right away, leave it, right? Which is a cue that means nothing at this point. Tell the dog, leave it. And then the dog may try to paw your hand, bite your hand, do all the things to get the food out. And when they give up, when they stop, you give it to them, right? This is standard practice. Now, there's nothing evil in this at all. I want people to understand me. I am not saying people who teach this are bad trainers, nothing like that. But what I want people to understand is when you hold the food out in your hand like that, that is a cue. That is just like taking Tucker into a play yard and holding a ball. That's a cue. So when the animal tries to get the food out, the animal is basically saying, my learning history has told me that when humans hold food out for me, it means I can eat it, right? And when by blocking that learner off the food in that moment, you are basically changing the rules. So these are the thoughts I had about leave it. One, and you're going to see a video of this, it sets the learner up to practice the things you don't want. So the first thing the learner practices on this, remember, this is a cue now. What does food in your hand mean? Do you want, the first thing the learner will practice is trying to get it. Often I find persistence gets reinforced. So like Tucker barking for half an hour and then someone throws the ball, the really persistent animals, they always get reinforced intermittently. But then you have the other kind of learners. Dr. Rosales Ruiz calls these the one trial learners. And this was my other dog. She would attempt to get the food once, fail, and quit. She would just leave the whole session, lay down and go, okay, food in your hand means it's hopeless and I don't want to try anymore. So you want to be real careful. You don't want to teach that. And you just want to think about it. Anytime you're teaching something, is your goal to inhibit a behavior or are you teaching a behavior? And you just want to ask yourself, sometimes inhibiting behavior is necessary for a specific, clear reason, but I think we should be very thoughtful about when we do that and not kind of put a big agenda over it like impulse control. If you want to say, I want to inhibit the dog or keep the dog from doing something, be honest about that. And then, like I said, this changes the rules about what food in the hand means. And I have found that when we teach all these pet owners this particular game, it doesn't transfer very well to real life. So that's why you have a lot of people going around going, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it all the time, because it's not, if we think that we're teaching impulse control, then that learner is now responsible to transfer this lesson to a squirrel or food on the ground, and if we're not thinking about context, then you're not going to realize that this is not what we're teaching. We're teaching dogs to move away from our hands, right? So we can come back to our discussion. So those are the reasons, and I think leave it's a great place to frame this discussion of errorless learning.
Sure.
Because it's just such a it's a standard approach, and it really represents that ignore what you don't want, reinforce what you do, and it really shows a situation where we're ignoring context cues, right? We don't really realize we're cueing the animal, to two things at once. That's a cue pileup, which is the hand reaching out is one cue, but you actually want the dog to do the opposite. You want them to move away, right? So I don't know if you had thoughts about that, or we could show more things.
For sure, yeah. This is it's a great example, isn't it? Because it is, if you've trained a dog, you'll typically have trained leave it in this way, and it will work. You know, the denial, the withholding of the reinforcer, it will work. You know, they will back away. You'll be able to reinforce them from backing away. It's in that process, I guess, what we have to understand is what is the animal experiencing. And I tend to find it is frustration that they're experiencing, right? Where we're denying them something that they would enjoy, something pleasurable, and the denial, the backing away is usually out of some attempt to move away. So you have extinction built into the learning process. And I think it's such a good example is because that part of the process just isn't necessary when you move to errorless learning. And it really does transition it really nicely onto that conversation about errorless learning of how we can remove those errors, remove that frustration from the learning process, happier learner, easier learning process. I just think it's a wonderful way to come at it. So that does transition really nicely into errorless learning then, Sarah. Do you have any examples of where leave has been taught through errorless learning that we could compare and contrast to that?
Yeah, well, I have that one video where, and I can just set it up first. I think it's video 2. And this was a little shelter dog that I worked with where she had a lot of leave it work. And the problem that the shelter staff came to me with was she won't stop focusing on our hands. Like she won't ever stop. We've worked on leave it for weeks. And so this is me just doing what is normal, right? I'm just waiting for her to stop fussing with my food. She was very persistent little girl. Another wonderful dog. Great. And the second she stops pawing, I'm feeding her. So she's just showing me her learning history. This is what has worked for her in her previous home, right? So I'm just doing a baseline here. I'm like, what does food in my hand mean to you? She does know that she can paw, 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 and then back off. Cute little dog. I liked her. Right? And so she is getting some success here. And I'm actually counting how many errors. An error would be any interacting with the hand, pawing at it, biting at it. Those are all errors based on what I need her to do. So I took some data and I counted all the pawing, and she had 5 correct responses. Okay. And I'll unpack all this, but I'm not thinking impulse control here. I'm thinking I need my food in my hands to cue something else. So here I'm going to change the cue by putting my hands out of sight. So what I'm doing here, and I don't hear any sound on this. So what I'm doing here is I am reinforcing every time she looks up at me. There you go. But the cue is off, right? The food is not in front of her. So she can now offer the correct behavior. Good. And that's all I want her to do, right? Wait quietly. Good. Good. And I'm also telling her when will that food be available after I say good. 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 Good girl. Good girl. So 0 errors in that session and 13 correct responses. So already our ratio has switched. This is all in the same day, by the way. I was doing this kind of for demo purposes. And now what I'm doing, I call this fading in. I borrowed this idea from Kay Lawrence, is I'm just fading the cue back in. The problem cue is hands with food in front of her. Normally, I think I would do a few more sessions to get this new behavior stronger, but you know how trainers get greedy. She does well. I think she makes only 1 mistake. But you can see how it's a little bit harder for her. Good. Good. Good.
Yeah, I'm a little bit sorry about the quality of that there. It seems to have buffered quite a bit on that particular video. Maybe
Oh,
if we,
really?
yeah, I'm
Oops,
not sure how it was at your side. Is that
I
your
have
daughter?
somebody arriving, so we will have an announcement.
No problem at all. Take your time.
I could see it quite well from where I
Really?
was.
That's
So
strange. On my
hopefully
side, it
others
was.
could too.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'll bring it back in just in case it was clear enough. But on my side, it was really like 10 seconds out delay wise. Let's try it again, Sarah. Okay.
Okay, I'll mute for a minute. Good. 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 Good girl. Good girl. Good. 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 Good.
And just to say, it looks okay at my side, Sarah. So you're good to go. Yeah, it's just at my side.
Good. Thank you, Tucky. I know they're here. Thank you. Good. Yeah, and you can see I can get the hands almost all the way in view. Good. Pretty fast. This was 3 sessions. Good. And you are going to see, I think, one error at the very end because I went too long. Good. But at this point, this is the one you can see. She's like, oh, I'm losing my mind. I'm tired. That little nudge.
Very good girl.
But
Very good
at that
girl.
point,
Wow.
because she had so much reinforcement in there for the right behavior, I don't mind that one little nudge. It rocks. So, but it's a great example. Imagine that same dog with 10 sessions of really, really practicing the correct behavior over and over and over again would become very, very strong. But I've lost you, Jim. There you are. Oh, I don't quite see you yet. I see me. Still don't quite see you yet.
Okay, that should be me back now. Can you see me now,
There you
Sarah?
go. Now I can see you. There you are.
Great stuff. I'm having a few technology issues. My poor laptop's having a bit of load on it today. But what a great example though of the way that's been trained, and the difference of that was a great contrast there. Fantastic.
Yeah, and it's just, again, that dog had a lot of leave it work with the hand. And that's an example. She was obviously intermittently reinforced. You know, think of a shelter staff with 5, 10 different people, different skill levels, all being told to work with her this way. And so intermittent reinforcement creates very persistent behavior usually. And so by repeating that lesson, I wasn't going to get anywhere very fast. Right. So I had to do that idea. Well, can I? And that's the simplest way to change the cue is just take my hands out of the picture. Okay. Can she do it now? Now she could do it fine with the treat pouch in front of her, but that might have been for another dog. The treat pouch might have been the cue to do all that mugging. So I could have taken that off, or I could have sat up in a chair or behind a gate or whatever. Again, you have to just find what's the most creative way to make that early reinforcement get going as fast as possible. And the first behavior I was asking from was just a head lift, basically. I don't know if you noticed, so I would start the session with food on the ground, and the first behavior was a head lift. Almost any dog will offer a head lift after eating food. So she's already set up to start out being correct right from the very beginning, right? Rather than sort of sitting and staring at her, waiting for her to guess what I want. Instead, I think I'm just going to put food on the ground and I'm going to start reinforcing as soon as her head lifts, because that head lift is the first step toward the behavior I want, which is eye contact. So that's what good trainers do. And that's what an errorless learning process would look like, is you've got to think, how can I arrange this so the very first thing that animal does is going to get them on the right path right away.
Sure.
So,
and it sets them up for success, really, is the best way of looking at it. I mean, I wonder how many behavior problems are originated in inadvertent reinforcement of those behavior issues at some point, either by owner interaction or by mistiming of rewards or whatever. Is that a fair way of looking at it, do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. That motto of ignore what you don't want. Yeah. And also, again, this constant work, if you're thinking about the animal is responsible to come up with the right answer, so I'm just going to let them guess because it's their job, then you'll set yourself up for those situations. We do that with shaping all the time, right? Where we just sit in front of the animal with our food on, which is a green light for something, and then expect them to come up with something, right? And that's why we see a lot of the extinction type stuff happening, where dogs are throwing behaviors at you, and that actually gets folded into the whole process. Because again, you got to remember, you're creating a context for that. So if you standing in front of the dog with a treat pouch on means cues, throw all the behaviors you know and get all excited about it and bark and do all those things. If that's what you're teaching, then later on, when you want that dog to stand still and wait for a cue, right? Or hold a stay or do something opposite, but you're still giving that cue, right? It's not fair. And I'm always looking for, how can I be as fair with my teaching as possible?
Totally. So. And that's a great example of leave it. I think it's probably the best example of it. What other examples can you maybe give to Sarah? I'm thinking maybe like I use errorless training for house training, for retrieval too. You can do errorless training to retrieve. Is that right?
Well, truly, anytime there is a goal behavior that you're trying to build, there's a starting point and there are prerequisite skills. So, so honestly, I think you could apply this to just about anything, as long as you're in the realm of, I'm going to build something, I'm going to teach something, I'm going to focus on, and we were told this as trainers years ago, focus on what you do want, and that's good, but nobody told us how to get there, right? So, and we often would focus on just reinforcing the behavior. So there's an ABC component to everything. And I was personally very focused on the BC, right? Ignoring the A completely and just go, I'll wait until I see the B I want, and then I'll reinforce it. But we were talking earlier, like that can get you in trouble. Like, for example, my other dog, I was early in her career, I was thinking, I'm going to reinforce laying on a bed by the dinner table instead of mugging us at the table. So every time she was on her bed, I would throw her food while we ate dinner. I was reinforcing the correct behavior. I thought I'd get more of it, and I do. To this day, she's 16 years old. She goes right to her bed at dinner time. But if that reinforcement schedule is not maintained as she's expecting, right, I am going to be dealing with extinction. Yeah. And I didn't realize that I basically taught her that the context of dinner time is very relevant to her now. It's like, it's work time. It's like a training session for her. I didn't build in early enough the idea that maybe the best thing to do right now is go lay down somewhere else because there's nothing relevant here for you. So that's something we have to be aware of. Again, I wasn't thinking of the A. I wasn't thinking of the antecedent context of what was I building. I was just thinking, oh, she's on her bed. That's correct. I'm throwing her food. And so we always have to be thinking of that all the time.
Sure. And that antecedent does have a load to it too. It's just not as simple as just having an antecedent. That antecedent has a history. It has that animal's perception, it has learning, genetics. It has a whole, I guess, package behind that. And if anybody's interested to check out Kim Brophy's leg system, I don't know if you came across this yet yourself, Sarah, but she has detailed it lovely underneath that antecedent, the kind of tip of the iceberg, and everything that underpins that antecedent is super important too, right? We can't discount the things like learning history, genetics, that particular individual self, and that kind of comes together a nice little package for the antecedent that we need to factor into. We were talking about an example which I think relates very similar to what you were talking about there about Kip, the border collie, where I've came in and set an expectation on a consultation that, this person comes in, he comes with a treat pouch, and he's going to reinforce me for behavior. And we were talking about some of the issues I faced before coming on, about some of the extinction I inadvertently built into his interactions with me. He needed something from me, he wanted, and then expected something from me. And when he didn't get it, I got a lot of real escalated behavior. It was jumping up, it was mouthing, it was grabbing my sleeves, grabbing the treat pouch, trying to mug me. Those are real issues, right? Those are difficult to resolve.
Yes. And you probably went in with this mindset of, I'm going to kind of blitz this dog with reinforcers. Yeah. Right. And what you have to be aware of is that under the conditions of you standing there giving that feedback, this dog was perfectly able to do, right? You were, remember that you said that the pet owners were amazed that he could do it. Yeah. He could offer these wonderful behaviors, but you have to be aware that it's under those conditions that they can happen. And that's the same with any kind of work that you do. You change the conditions, you're going to change the behavior. So one of the things I really work on, you remember the dog I told you about that pesters, she has dinner table issues. Well, this room, there she is, the darker dog. This room is not a relevant room and I'm sitting at a table, right? Sure. But this particular room is not a room that is relevant to her for any kind of food. But if I was trying to do this meeting at the dinner table, I might start to see some of those behaviors that I'm responsible for, right? That I conditioned. But she's not an impulsive dog, right? Look, see that she's perfectly capable of doing this, of being relaxed and, so that's just something to think about anytime you bring reinforcement into any picture. And that's where the genetics and all that stuff comes into play. Is some dogs will mug you a couple times and then they go, well, that didn't work, I'll go take a nap. Other dogs, right? And if you think about what a border collie is bred to do, they have to be persistent to do their job. That's they are genetically, often, every individual is unique, but they're often gonna push through those frustrations. They're gonna kind of ride that wave and get the result. They're very, that goal oriented. Tucker's like that. Just power through it, power through the frustration. It's just a stepping stone to get to what you want.
And that's why we bred them. Yeah, that's why we bred them.
And that's why we bred them. So I think that's a great way of bridging that divide also between sort of that ethological approach and the ABA approach, is to say, okay, I'm ABA says I'm creating an ABC here. Yeah. Ethology says this particular individual might bring to that ABC this particular package of traits. Yeah. So you might ahead of time kind of walk in going, I'm going to have to be extra clear, when reinforcement's available for this animal. And maybe the first lesson for this animal is, when is it available and when is it not? There's only one room of the house where we train. The rest of the house is not relevant. How can you make that clear? I know some people with like working Malinois, and they never, ever train the dogs in the house. The house is only for relaxation. And, you know, because those are working animals. So they work in the training center. And when they go to the training center, they're like level 10, just, wow, you know, like, you know, and when they go in the house, poosh, calm down. Because since they were puppies, they just never were given any kind of that kind of work in the house. And that's really smart, actually, for that breed. If you're going to live your life with 6 Malinois, that's not a bad idea. So that's just what I think. I think it's about taking responsibility and thinking again, combining these beautiful lenses that we have. We have the ethology lens. We have this tremendous respect for the individual that we're working with. We want to be ethical. And then we have this very helpful ABA lens that for me, again, is not reductionist in any way. It really liberates the individual, I find, because you're no longer blaming the individual. You're no longer saying you're broken, you're wrong. Sure. It's your responsibility to come up with this. You're really just thinking, oh, in this context, you need extra support, you know, or whatever. So
it's such a good way of putting it. And I love the fact that you've sort of blended that ethological model with the ABA model. I think that's what Kim did so well, and sorry to relate back to her, but if anybody wants to check that out, she's done it beautifully. And I think it's such an important point. The other.
Okay. We have work crews right outside the window.
No worries at all.
Thank you, buddy. They're allowed. I feel very safe. Yeah, shake it off. Good boy. Yeah, I know. He doesn't approve.
No, doesn't like the workers. He's doing his job well there by the sounds of it. But it is such an important point is to always be viewing that kind of ethological, you know, we selectively bred these dogs for a purpose, right? And I kind of feel for them a little bit, particularly the dogs I work with, who, you know, border collies, Hungarian Vizslas, and they're in domestic settings, they're in people's homes, and I guess they're expected to conform to our expectation of how a dog should behave rather than what they were actually bred for in the first place. And that can be really problematic. That might not translate well into a calm, relaxed animal who's maybe been bred for a purpose, but then all of a sudden sitting in a large kennel, which is essentially a house to them, isn't it, really, when you think of it in that way? I think it's hard for people to get past that barrier where you're trying to get through to them that, you know, dogs were bred for a purpose. Let's give them outlets. Let's try and meet those genetically predisposed needs. But also factoring in that a home might not be a great place for some of these dogs. And you may see what we would deem to be problem behavior is just that animal's attempt to meet their own needs, really, essentially. Is that something you would agree with?
Absolutely. And it is a challenge. And my heart goes out to all the clients I've worked with, you know, they bring this animal into their lives. They have such hopes.
Yeah.
And they have a whole vision for what a dog is. And from their point of view, you know, this animal looks crazy, or, you know, and often it's hard to provide for the animal what they really need. So my heart goes out to them. It's a challenge. And the people that help them, I'm always in awe. People like you that go in and really try to teach this. And I did have a wonderful experience recently. A client just contacted me. His dog of 10 years passed away, and he was a client of mine 10 years ago. And it was just a little poodle guy, but when they called me in, they were ready to euthanize him.
Oh, dear.
And the reason was they had just adopted him, and they had a trainer come in before me to evaluate him. And I guess he had some mild resource guarding or something. And so she put leathers, the trainer came in with leathers on, and basically forced the dog, you know, pushed the dog into being very aggressive. And then said, this dog is broken. He's broken. And you should euthanize him. He's not safe in your house. And they got me in as a second opinion. Now, there are times when I say there's children in the house, you know, we have to rehome, or I'm not saying I wouldn't always do this, but I evaluated the dog and I just said that I think that if we understand the conditions where this aggression happens, and respect that, I think he's going to be fine. Like, I really do. I think it was very clear under what conditions you would see that aggression. It was easy to avoid those situations. And the family luckily tried it and did it. And he became a beloved family member for 10 years. And they just wrote to me and thanking me, saying what a gift, that, and it was just this simple switch of understanding the conditions, right? And there are situations where the conditions are too complex and it doesn't work out that beautifully.
Sure.
But there are a lot of situations where it is true, where if you just look at the context and just say, hey, if you let that dog eat by himself in a room with the door closed,
what's up?
We don't have to go in there and impulse control that. It's just, he just wants you to leave him alone when he eats. That's not hard. Things like that. I want to liberate people to just look for those ways of looking at individuals, because I think it's more respectful in general.
Agreed. And that's a nice transition point on to talking about impulse control, then, about the construct that it potentially is. And what I wanted to talk about is, the difference between impulse control and stimulus control, and where they kind of meet, and where impulse control might not be an appropriate term, essentially, Sarah.
Yeah, now I have to be careful, because I kind of started this trend where everyone's feeling very embarrassed, but like they try to use the word impulse control, and then they're like, oh, but that's not the politically correct word, so I can't use it. And then and I've been seeing that happen, and I feel a little bit guilty. Like, I've started this, it's very punishing, right? Bad trainers.
Sure.
And that's not my intention. Like I said, as you can tell by the way I'm talking, I'm hoping to just help liberate people, because I find it fascinating, for one thing, and liberating, and a wonderful way to train better. But all constructs, as we learned from Dr. Friedman, right, have potential downfalls to them. And the one that I've come across frequently with impulse control, and a construct is basically something, it's like a concept, and 5 different people can all look at that concept, and we might all mean something different, right, when we talk about it. So an ethologist might mean something totally different from a pet owner, for example. And all of us bring our learning history and our baggage to how we look at, right? So I have found it problematic when you tell pet owners a dog has impulse control problems, because a lot of pet owners have that cultural baggage of, it means the dog is bad. It means the dog is making immoral decisions, right? Because we bring that cultural with us.
Yeah.
So now we're blaming the individual, and that is going to set us up for we're going to go for punishment. It's much easier to go for punishment when you have that mindset.
Oh yeah.
So that's the danger. And it's not that I'm saying it's the wrong term. It has its place in many discussions, but it's one of those ones that whenever I encounter it, like with Tucker, for example, the dog ended up in the shelter with an impulse control problem. And so I just feel like if we just put it aside and say, what does it look like? And what conditions does it happen, the behavior happen? If we just reframe it to that, it's just really easy to get to a solution that is less stressful for the dogs. And but we could put the slide up, let's see, slide 7. It's sort of the 2 mindset slide. If your computer is still happy.
It's not particularly, I'll be honest.
There we go, lovely. So so when we have a behavior like a dog scream barking, right? whenever that dog makes a quote unquote error, which is a behavior that's happening and it's not one that we want to live with, or it's unwanted, or it's problematic, it's easy to think there's something wrong with your dog, right? So we'll hear words like he's made a bad choice, or his brain is misfiring, or he's cuckoo. Sometimes we do blame these natural drives. So we say, well, he's a high drive dog, so there's no way he can learn this. He can never relax. He's just hardwired for this. So there's no point in trying. And I feel like these are dead ends. I really believe in the potential of all individuals to learn and grow. So now stimulus control, and we can talk a little bit about it. And I agree with Susan, it's a problematic term, she mentioned. Whenever you hear the word stimulus control, I find everybody's brain turns off. Everyone gets a little nervous. People start thinking we have no free will or something. It's an unfortunate term, but all it means is that the environment is influencing behavior all the time. And stimulus just means the stimuli that we're perceiving around us at all times, which is going on all the time. Those stimuli are influencing our behavior all the time. So in that mindset, when you have that lens on and a dog makes an error, like scream barking, I say that's a great time to ask the question, is there a better way? Can we look at my training and teach something different? And I always like to start with the phrase, oh, he's showing me what his learning history is, right? Under these conditions, this is what this animal has learned. It's innocent. It makes sense to that animal. The behavior is functioning well for that animal in this situation. So it's just objective. He's just showing me what his learning history is. It's not good or bad. And then when I want to replace that behavior with something, I'm going to start looking at my skills. Have I clarified that criteria? Have I broken things down? Are my mechanics clear? Have I been clear enough with reinforcement? And then you want to really ask yourself, does this animal have the level of fluency required to operate in those challenging conditions, right? So you're going to look at context, you're going to look at reinforcement history, and I threw in the word trust, but that's another big construct to unpack. But I do feel like the big breakthrough I had with Tucker was when he started to trust the patterns, that whenever I asked him to wait, whenever I asked him to delay gratification, it was always going to come. There was no tricks involved, no changing of the rules, no double crosses, and as much as my skill set allowed, as few moments of confusion as possible. I'm not perfect, but that was my goal with him. So I felt like that's helped him build a trust in these new ABC patterns that I was setting up. So that's that slide. You can come back to us again.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Mm-hmm. And even that word control, just to sort of expand on what you were saying there, that word control is loaded too. It has connotations depending on your lens of how you view that. And Susan Friedman, who elucidates so well all the time, had mentioned that it's maybe better to view it as an influence as opposed to a control. You know, something's influencing behaviour or something's underpinning it. That's maybe a better way of articulating it. Would you say that, Sarah?
I think it is a really good way to look at it. You know, I have been on a tear for quite a while to like, let's make stimulus control sexy again. Let's make it an exciting term. I do love cues. When an animal responds beautifully to a cue that you have taught with that beautiful fluency and that it's to me the most beautiful thing in the world. And I've always just called that stimulus control, and that's why I have a positive association with that term, right? But yeah, and one thing I want to clarify, and I have seen this mistake happening because people are struggling with this shift from impulse control to stimulus control, is it's not a straight swap. You're not just wrapping up the same mindset with a new language, right? Where people will say, they'll leave it the same way, and the dog is showing control, what we would call control, and they're saying, okay, now now I'm using stimulus control because the dog looks in control. Do you see? And that's actually not true. That's not what stimulus control means. We have impulse control has a sort of a suite of behaviors that we might define as a quiet waiting behavior, moving away from reinforcement, turning away from something that the animal might chase or bite or eat. We might define it in those terms. But stimulus control is all the time. Like it's whether or not you get the behavior you want, stimulus control is still happening. Sure. So, simple example, I could hold out a cupcake and say, you know, Jim, would you like this chocolate cupcake? And you have a choice, right? So the cupcake is setting up a condition now for something, some kind of behavior. You could grab it and shove it in your mouth and eat it really fast, and then we would call you impulsive, right?
Yeah.
That's the label you would get. Or you could say, no, thank you. And we would say, oh, wow, he's so genteel. He's watching his figure, whatever. He has good executive management skills. I don't know what we call it. But stimulus control is happening either way. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There's a cue, and then there's this behavior might happen based on this reinforcement history, or this behavior might happen based on this reinforcement history. So which reinforcement history is going to win, right, in this situation? It has nothing to do with how moral or good or ethical you are. It's if you've been taught to say no thank you, or you have a clear understanding of the reinforcement involved in being able to fit into your bathing suit in the summer, or whatever it is that you've decided is the reinforcer that you want, you're going to say no thank you. But there's still stimulus control happening. That's what I want people to understand. It's not like stimulus control is when you say no thank you, and it's not. I hope that's clear, but I have seen people make that mistake when they're trying to kind of grapple with these two terms, because the word control gets us all confused.
It certainly does. And I think it is worth maybe spending some time talking about an animal's ability to control the impulses versus inhibitory nature of you know, sort of training or learning. If we're inhibiting behavior, that's not impulse control, right? That's not self-control from the animal's point of view. We're simply inhibiting behavior from their perspective. Not necessarily a choice, would you say, Sarah, or would you say it is a choice?
Well, this is a big can of worms. Do we have free will? Do we have choice? Sure. I certainly think we do. It's just whatever we choose is also based on stimulus control. It's like you can't not choose. You can't not respond to the stimuli around you, but you can do an array of different things depending on your reinforcement history, or your learning history, or your skill set, or I don't know how you feel at the time, whatever reinforcement is most, right? Let's say you haven't eaten in 4 days. That cupcake is going to mean something different, right? Than if you just had a giant meal and a cheesecake. You've already eaten cheesecake, and the reinforcement is going to shift. You don't need it as anyway, but, could you rephrase your question again?
Actually, just one quick point there. There are motivating operations, right, underpinning us, which is I think what you were talking about. That we're not necessarily consciously aware of, right? So we definitely have another subject for another day to talk about in terms of free will, because I have quite a strong view on this, and I would propose that we don't have much. If we do, it's within very defined parameters, and I would not necessarily say that that's free will. But those motivating operations, you're absolutely right, will influence our perception of that particular stimulus, right? As you say, if you haven't eaten for 4 days, that cupcake is going to be pretty appealing.
Right. Yeah. And you'll be more likely to maybe show impulsive behavior.
Sure.
Under those conditions. Again, under those conditions, you're more likely to grab it and stuff it in your mouth. Sure. But we're talking about choice.
Yeah, can an animal control are they capable cognitively of being able to control their own impulses? That's probably, again, another conversation for another day. There's quite a lot to unpack there, Sarah. Sorry to throw that on you so late in the conversation, but do you think they're capable of it?
Well, I don't know. I don't have the training to look through that lens, right? As again, it's something I learned from Susan, is there are cognitive scientists, that are looking through that lens all the time and asking that question. But I don't have that training. So my training is basically on the behaviors I can see and the environmental factors I can manipulate. I absolutely have faith that my animals have complex inner lives, and
Sure.
you know, I believe this. That's why I treat them with such respect. But honestly, when I just bring it down to this simple level of, under these conditions, this behavior is happening, this is the reinforcement for that behavior. When I just make it simple like that, I'm actually able to love and respect them more. I don't know how to explain it, because it seems so innocent to me. There's no grand scheme. There's no, and I think the real answer is, sure, maybe they cognitively can, but if in front of you right now this behavior is happening, right? It reminds me of like the pet owners often say, well, he knows better.
Yeah.
Right? Which is very common. You say he knows better. Yeah. But right now the dog's jumping all over you, and I sometimes, it sounds facetious, but I say, well, if he knew better, this would not be happening.
Yeah, true.
Right now. So maybe under other conditions he shows a different behavior, but right now these conditions are cueing all this jumping. I don't really care if he knows better. What I care about is right now my job is to teach him something here. And my first step would be, that's another one, right? We always ignore jumping, right? Sometimes in the moment, that's the best you can do. You just sort of stay neutral, let it pass. Other times, sometimes it's better to just change something. So walk away, go to a different room, sit down, change something. Just, again, turn the cue off. Now, walking away could be a punisher, maybe. But sometimes just standing there and continually having the dog jump on you, again, you're in that impasse. You're stuck. You're
a loop,
right?
Isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, and I do. Well, we have other things, but I know we're talking about many things. Is there anything really important to show? I could show more videos. Well, we could jump to this whole question of controlling impulses and choice. We could show the Jenny Efimova video with Larkin, which is a wonderful example, but I have to set it up first.
Sure.
So this is one of my students. I have a class called Control is an Illusion, which is all about delving into these topics in a very deep way. And this student excelled. She went way above and beyond what even I can do, honestly, with my dogs. But the game is something that we learned from Kay Lawrence, which is called shopping. And it's basically, you start out with a bowl of food, right? In a container, up on a shelf. So very easy situation. And the goal behavior is the animal will turn away from that food and come find you. And the consequence is you will mark and come back to the food and have a little food party at the food, right? And you do this over and over and over and over again, building a pattern of turn away from the food. Now, if anyone wants their dog to turn away from a squirrel or whatever, that key turn away behavior, that head turn away, come find you, it has to be super strong. Mm-hmm. Super duper strong. So this is a beautiful game to help build that in. But over time, you fade in the difficulty. So that food comes down to the floor, and then you gradually uncover the food. And I do tell my students, if your dog makes a mistake and eats the food, you have to let them have it. Okay. You can't block them off. You can't, right? They're going to get it. And now you've got one deposit in the bank account of eat the food. Mm-hmm. Now the bowl of food, I always also tell my students, think of what a bowl of food means to a dog. When you set a bowl of food down on the floor, how many times has that cued, come eat? Right? Because we put the food down every night for their dinner, every single night, right? So how many times is that cued? That so we have to work extra. So it's like we have to be super good splitters, right? In order to achieve an open bowl of food on the floor, and the dog can turn away from it, and I call it without conflict, which means that the only consequence has been positive reinforcement. There has never been a block off. There's never been extinction as a part of the whole context for this game. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
So,
what video was that,
so-
Sarah, just so I can cue it up for you? What number of video was that?
This would be number 6. And this
Number
is
6.
Jenny Efimova, who's a wonderful trainer, and her wonderful dog Larkin. So you'll see 2 bowls of chicken. This is a Labrador. Apparently Labradors are, right? Everyone says Labradors are eating machines. You can never,
Mine is.
ever, you know, they're always impulsive or whatever.
Sure.
And you're going to see him coming away from not 1, but 2 bowls. So it's like in a ping pong pattern. They're open bowls. I think it's ham and chicken of food. And what was something I was going to say about it? I did ask her, did he ever make an error in the whole training process? And she said he got the bowl of food twice. Yeah. And she let him have it. So basically you think of hundreds of repetitions of reinforcement for the behavior of turning away, 2 reinforcers for the behavior of just eating it, with no consequences, nothing. And so that's what you're going to see here is a lovely, lovely training. So go ahead.
Oops. My poor laptop. Bear with me. That's okay, but
oh, this one's fine too. This is actually 1 bowl, but this is fine too.
Boy, very good.
So this first one, he eats quite a bit. He's allowed to eat whatever's on that snuffle mat. And as soon as he finishes the last bite of food on the snuffle mat, the open bowl of food will be the cue. Yeah, the first rep, he's going to look at it for a second. That's the cue to go find mom.
Let's go shopping. Good boy.
So why is he doing that, right? We could say cognitively he's controlling his impulses. I don't know. But she split this behavior down into tiny, tiny bits, brought the bowl down very, very slowly and carefully. Almost an errorless progression.
Let's go shopping. Good job. Good job, buddy. Good boy.
And there we go.
love that. Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah. And you just see his body language. There's a softness to it. There's a, you don't feel that. Often I feel like dogs that are taught with negative punishment. And just to define that for people, a negative punishment approach would be, and I'm not saying it's not effective, but as soon as the dog goes for the food, you would block it off or remove it, take it away. So and there's a little distinction. Extinction is when the reinforcement contingency is happening, and the animal tries to do the behavior that normally works, and it just doesn't work. Nothing happens. And then the animal will go through a large repertoire or maybe get what we call frustrated. That's extinction. But negative punishment is when you specifically block or remove the reinforcement contingent on a behavior. And that's why it's important to understand that is punishment. It doesn't have to be harsh. It's not evil. But if we basically can keep ourselves honest and go, can we teach something like this dog is doing without that? I just say, let's just take it off the table and see, can we do it? Can it be just as strong? And what does the dog look like, right? Instead of tensely backing off and holding still and kind of looking tense, the dog goes, oh boy, I get to go find mom and play the game. And the whole game is actually part of the idea, and this is something Kay Lawrence taught, the whole process of connecting with the human, the happy talk, the getting to move, that movement, all of that is actually reinforcing as well. And so it's not just about getting the food, but it's about the whole, and the stronger we can build that connection, the easier it is for dogs to turn away from squirrels later, And what my students often do is they teach this skill, and then we fade in real life into the right. So we'll put a person next to the bowl, a person the dog might want to jump on, and the dog practices this skill using the game as kind of like training wheels, right? But you do have to fade it out eventually, because you can't always have training wheels. But pretty soon that simple behavior of just turn and come find the human, it gets easier and easier for the animal to offer that.
So many applications. So many applications.
It's a beautiful game.
Yeah, it really is. It's got my mind thinking all over the place. Because I use engage, disengage quite a lot when we're working around kind of distractions, and they engage with the trigger, disengage, come back to the handler, get reinforced. It's a lovely protocol. It works very effectively. It's great for things like recall, because you're building that ability to disengage from a trigger, come back to the handler and get reinforced. And I could see so many little patterns there that would be the kind of bedrock, the foundations for those types of things, which is lovely. You mentioned a couple of things there that I wanted to go back onto, which was about the negative punishment side of it, and how there is punishment, and that whilst we're not adding something to be punishing, we are removing something to be punishing. But I guess that would be interpreted by the learner themselves, right? Subjective to that individual learner, that they might find that extremely distressing depending on their temperament, learning history, who they are as an individual. So we have to be careful there that will work, but it's maybe not necessary. Is that a better way of looking at errorless training? Is there's a easier, simpler, more effective way without that potential frustration, distress, whatever?
Well, again, I think there may be situations where that's the best you can do for whatever, right? And in that situation, I would like trainers to just know they're using punishment and just say that. I am using negative punishment on purpose for a very specific reason, to inhibit a behavior, right? Because basically the behavior is you're stopping the animal from going to the food and eating it, or whatever. And once you say that, you can do good practices, which you might ask a colleague, hey, I'm about to use punishment. Do you have any other ideas? Is there something I could do instead? Or can you get, right? Because punishment could have fallout.
Yeah.
And maybe, again, I am not one of those so hardliners that it's not in the realm of possibility for me. But I would really, really, really try all other options first.
Yeah, sure.
And certainly for that type of game, like Zen Bowl games or training games, there is no reason, I don't think, for a punisher in that situation. It's not life or death. There's no, right? And it's a wonderful skill to be able to put a reinforcer down on the floor, work your dog, release them to the reinforcer. A lot of us do that. And I feel like there's no reason to teach that with punishment, right? Because those are our silly games that we made up, right? Sure. And I feel that way about a lot of things, that if it's a human contrived thing, we're even more responsible, I think, to take an errorless approach.
Yeah, agreed. And you mentioned there was another one with 2 bowls. Did I get up the wrong video originally? Did you say it was video 7 was the one that had 2 bowls?
That's okay.
I
sent you this. I said this one is fine. I sent you this one, and then Jenny that very night sent me a new one, and it had 2 bowls in the room.
Right.
But it's the same exact thing. And I actually like this one because she really goes out of sight. I mean, she's like out of the room.
Sure.
There's no way she can really influence him. He is responding to the bowl as a cue. And I like that first one where he kind of looks at it. And you almost, you could just see that there's a cue pile up there. There's a bowl of food that cues an old reinforcement history. And then there's this new game. All right. And then he chooses to go and play to respond to that cue. It's like a layering of cues. And we actually like the animals to notice that bowl of food at least a few times, because we want that cue to be a salient thing. It is a cue. So we want them to look at a squirrel and go, that's a cue for orienting to mom or whatever. Sure. Rather than an avoidance type situation, you'll see dogs really like, I don't see it. I'm not looking at it. You'll see them kind of, you'll see that a lot. And that's a different thing because you're teaching avoidance.
Sure. Sure.
So we kind of really like there it is. There's my cue. I love my cue, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking of another great example of that, which is Chirag Patel's bucket game, which I use quite a lot. If you've come across, fantastic. You have your little bucket of treats, and you're teaching a cue for a behavior, which is the little bucket comes out, and you either stand stationary or you lie down on your mat, and you're teaching that errorless. You're just saying that's the cue, this is the behavior. You're layering it over the top. But I find it's quite commonly where you'll get those dogs who are really pushy with the little bowl. They want to get in about it. They want to go and eat the food that's there. And I think that's a really great example of where that could come into practice, of just a very learned cue, and it's very specific to say, under these conditions, when this comes out, this is what you do, and this is how we reinforce you for it. I think it's a fantastic example.
Yeah, absolutely. And how can you set that? If a learner says to you, a bowl of food means dive my head in immediately and scarf it up, then you go, okay, that's what you understand a bowl to mean. Yeah. Let's work with that. We got to take the bowl out of the picture because we don't want to cue that. So let's take the bowl out of the picture. Okay, what do we want you to do? Or is the dog supposed to stand there? Is the dog supposed to go lay down? What is it? And so teach that first, and then bring the bowl in, I don't know, up high or something. But now, because that reinforcement history is in there, that animal has more of a chance to kind of, if the animal does get into an extinction situation, right? Extinction is just, I want the thing. It's not happening. I'm going to try stuff. And it's not necessarily, it's also it can be creative. So if they start to go through behaviors and they immediately come across one that is going to work well for you and for the animal, then you've set that animal up for success, even if there was a tiny moment of trial and error first. But if by kind of stacking the deck in your favor, you're more likely to get a behavior you want. That makes sense.
Yeah, it sure does. And we all know that kind of typical dog that if you stand and withhold, that they will cycle through every learned behavior that's got them reinforcement previously. Floyd, my dog's like that. He'll down, he'll paw, he'll spin round, he'll jump up and down. And I wonder if we could just cover off that a part of that extinction, or the function of extinction, would be frustration, right? Frustration will be in there, but I guess there will be degrees to frustration. Some frustration might be okay, as you say, being able to work things out in a trial and error way. Lots of frustration might not be good either, though, and particularly when the animal is so distressed by that frustration that it's causing problem behavior, kind of all over the place. And I'm thinking about a couple of cases I'm working on just now where any withholding at all is causing extreme frustration within the animal, and that's learned, right? That's something that's sort of developed over time for that particular individual.
Absolutely. And I just think of them as a narrow repertoire, don't have a lot of options. And this one or two option that they do have, what they've learned is just to do them harder and stronger and more intense. Yeah. And so, those learners are tricky. They're not easy, especially if you want to use reinforcement, right? With a learner that has learned that reinforcement is a cue for doing all those things. That shopping game, by the way, is really, really helpful. I have found for a lot of those types of learners, if you just take the food off your body.
Mm-hmm.
and put it somewhere else. You've changed the picture now, and you can start capturing things. Sometimes that movement to the reinforcement. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a reason for the scatter on a snuffle mat. Well, the snuffle mat helps cue the game, but it also, I have found with the dogs that tend to get a little over the top behaviors around the cue of food. Notice how I have to really phrase that properly. I have found that if you can offer them sort of dense amounts of reinforcement strategically, it brings that level down. It brings, like, it's sort of like that cupcake thing, if you haven't eaten in 4 days,
Sure.
you're gonna, right? But if someone just scattered a snuffle mat full of like 25 pieces of food and you've been able to just graze them, by the time that animal looks up again and looks at you, you're gonna have a window in there of a little more relaxation, I have found. But if you divvy out one piece of food contingently and then wait way too long for the next correct behavior, and then one piece of food, this very stingy, I have personally found that creates those bubble up cycles of that bubbling over where they start throwing behaviors at you, and then you pick one and now you're in a loop. So I have found a lovely, I'm crazy about snuffle mats, where the dog does something, the reinforcer is this nice extended low pressure,
functional,
eat as much as you want. And then when the animal looks up at you, you still have to be quick sometimes. Sometimes it's just a look up behavior. You can capture it again. But eventually what they'll do is they'll look up at you. You've already cooled the jets a little, and they'll wait. They'll actually, right? Because they're like, okay, are you gonna do that thing again? And now you've actually got a window to build a waiting behavior.
And plus that behavior is functionally rewarding to our dogs who just love sniffing anyway. So you get the added benefit of doing an activity that they love doing. And there was a wonderful study by Alexandra Horowitz on, kind of having that positive outlook in life by doing nose work, right? It's like meditation for dogs. And I'm a massive scent work too, and I know you are. But I appreciate we are coming up to well over an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4 with you, Sarah, and you've been gracious enough to give us so much of your time, and it's been wonderful talking to you. Maybe we've got another subject though for in future, because scent work I'm so passionate about too. That's maybe something we can talk about again if that's something you'd be up for.
Awesome. Always. That's one of my favorite topics. Were there any of the videos or anything that I sent you that you would really like to end on?
Sure.
I wonder if you don't mind, it's just because it's one of my favorites, is video 7. This will be the end. Now, this is a video of Tucker just about a year ago. And we've done tons and tons of work clarifying all the cues around his toys, right? So, the toys used to cue barking. It used to cue biting biting the toy in a dangerous way, all kinds of stuff. And what you're going to see here in this video is, I call it a stimulus control tune-up, which is basically I'm asking him, can he carefully distinguish a whole bunch of cues related to that ball? So go means run and I'll throw it. Tug means come and bite it. And then I even ask him the difference. Can you tell the difference between a chin rest and a tug? And just to show the level of, this is all of this was taught with positive reinforcement. And it basically shows the idea that each cue is registering as clear and relevant for him. There's no confusion for him about what each of these little cues means. And what it looks like is self-control. It's going to look like self-control. But I want everyone to watch this last video and just think, this is learning history. And this is the same dog that would just scream bark the whole time, right? Anyone held a ball. So this is learning history. This is about 4 years of learning history of just clarifying these cues. Yes, and then we're going to stop.
I only popped back in just to say, I watched this earlier, Sarah, and I absolutely loved it. Yeah, I watched this little video earlier. I thought exactly the same thing. Could be viewed as impulse control, but I just popped back in to say I thought this was a fantastic video, so we'll just press play just now.
Park it. Catch. Good boy. Park it. Tug. Drop. Park it. Tug. Good boy. Drop. Settle. Tug. Good. Drop. Go. 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 Boy, easy. Settle. Chin. Go. Good boy. Chin. Go. Go. Good boy. Super. Chin. Tuck. Good. Drop. Chin. Go. Go.
Love it. What a great
Okay.
video.
And on
So
that,
much to unpack there. So much
yeah,
to
we don't
unpack.
have to unpack it, but just the idea
Yeah.
is we would call that impulse control, but it's really very clear teaching and
Yeah.
a deep reinforcement history. And you can see that's what I'm clarifying for him is waving the ball is not a cue to bite it, right? Only that single word that I'm saying is the relevant green light, and I've taught him so that he can, right? And then when I haven't said anything, he has that beautiful stand and wait behavior. And that's what I'd love to leave people with is just the amazing potential that every learner has, with good teaching and a clear understanding of how environmental conditions influence behavior, and a dedication to finding those errorless starting points.
That's
If
fantastic.
people can just do that, anything is possible. So that's a good
Did I
note
see
to end on.
he nearly vocalized at you? He was just about to bark at you and didn't. About halfway through, when you asked him to settle, you could almost see him just about to vocalize, and then he didn't. And I thought at that moment, is that a choice? Is that something that was this used to work for me? Now I'm not going to use it. Is that something that would be inhibited? Would that be potentially a dog who says, "Well, self-control"? Potentially,
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
yeah. It was interesting.
By asking for that many, he was right on that edge
Yeah.
of going either way. And it would have been fine if he had barked.
Sure.
But so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. All I know is what I saw in that video, which is the learning history that I put in there was at the forefront, right? Was guiding his choices in that moment.
Sure.
But the old behaviors don't go away.
Mhm.
It's not like I erase them or right. The barking could still happen, and when that happens, then I immediately look at the conditions.
Yeah.
What has caused that to happen, and do we need to go change the channel? Do we need to go do something a little easier, or just and there's a lot of complex reasons for that. But I just love that video.
It's great.
Very happy with this dog's progress and just the journey. And right now he says, I have been boring for long enough.
Yeah, he's a lucky dog to have found you, Sarah. And I think everyone will have taken something away from that. And thank you so much for doing it.
Labrador it's a Labrador tail problem.
I've got one too. Yeah, there's a. That's great, Sarah. We'll cap it off there as a natural conclusion. We'll definitely run out of time before we run out of topics, and there's definitely follow-up there that I would love to speak to you about. So, but we'll cap it off there. You've been gracious enough to give us enough of your time, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again, okay?
My pleasure. This has been delightful, and I'm happy to engage in any discussion, questions, anything, at any time.
Great stuff, Sarah. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
All right. Bye-bye.